Bethesda. A word that strikes fierce emotion in those who hear it. Recently, because of the mess-ups like Fallout 76 and how badly Bethesda has treated its customers. But before, this word meant something. It meant a great game was coming, and while it may have bugs and problems, there was going to be a special sort of magic attached to that game that would live on for generations. So where did they go wrong? Why do we remember so fondly games like Morrowind, Oblivion, and even Skyrim? But today, we can only look and laugh at Bethesda's newest creations like Fallout 76. It's time Bethesda looks back to the things that made their games so great before, and at the same token, shed light on the things they have never done well. It is time Bethesda finally captures that magic that brought us as fans to them in the first place. And this is how they do it.
Drink to our youth, today's come and gone, for the age of aggression is just about done.
Recently, on stream, I started playing Skyrim for the first time ever in over 10 years. And I was brought back to the magic that made me fall in love with Bethesda games in the first place. And it started to get me thinking. What was it about these older Bethesda games that was so magical, not only to me as a kid, but now as I play it on stream with you guys, that they've lost in their newer games? And what does it take for Bethesda to finally bring that sense of mystery back to their newest game, Starfield? The first time I ever played a Bethesda game was actually when I was a kid. I remember for the first time ever getting an Xbox 360 and Oblivion and being absolutely mesmerized coming out of the sewers at the amazing graphics and storytelling. But as I continued to play more and more, what really set Oblivion apart from other games I had played up to that point, including StarCraft, Call of Duty, and Halo, was the depth of the experience itself and the character creation and stories that I made along the way. And that's what I want to talk about first, because I think the most glaring difference between Bethesda's games of old and their newest creations is how little depth they put into their new games. A really good example is in Morrowind, a game that's over 20 years old now, had more depth than Fallout 76, Skyrim, or any recent Bethesda game even wishes it could have. Morrowind gave you multiple choices and ways to tackle problems. For instance, in Morrowind, you could lockpick doors just like you can in Skyrim, but you could also cast a spell to have the door open up. And if there was a trap on the door, well, you would need your lockpick again. That way you could disarm the trap, or you could learn telekinesis and use that to open the trap past the door and get the door open fully. Another example is in Morrowind, when you were holding different items, they made your character heavier, and the less you were holding, the faster you could run, the more stamina you would have, and thus, the better you could fight in combat and the longer you could go without tiring out. But in newer games like Fallout and Skyrim, honestly, if you have too many items, your character just stops in his place and you have to drop a few things and you're good to go. All of these systems that Bethesda put in their games early on have slowly and surely, generation by generation, been dumbed down to appeal to a larger audience. And while this has resulted in massive sales for most of Bethesda's recent games, I'm looking at you, Skyrim, that still has hurt them in the long term, because it has only shown people year after year how shallow these new games are and how much less replayability there is when your choices are limited so far and few between. I'm gonna harp on it again, but in Morrowind, you had to decide between being decked out in heavy, crazy armor that made it harder to kill you and allowed you to carry more items, or you could be a fast and nimble fighter that you could traverse the environment more easily, fire more spells, and generally move more quickly, but you couldn't carry as many things. You couldn't get as much loot. And it was these trade-offs and mixing of systems that made the breadth of gameplay in these older Bethesda titles so engaging and immersive. And year after year, they have only taken away from what made these games so great in the first place. And now, in their shadow, we are left with Fallout 76, where perk cards replace actual, dedicated, and deep ways to upgrade your character. For Starfield, Bethesda needs to realize that the gaming landscape has matured. This isn't the 1990s, and this isn't the early 2000s either. Gaming has come so far from when it first was just a small niche where only the nerdiest of nerds play. It's now ingrained in the very fabric of our society, and it's because of this that a lot of the audience is looking for a more deep experience. We've been through the growing stage in gaming where it's become mainstream and everyone's been following it. And now that there's so much backing, it's time we get back to these more immersive experiences that first defined the genre in the 1990s and what Bethesda truly came up on. Starfield needs to give its players agency. It needs to allow you to tackle every situation in multiple ways, and thus giving you the feeling that you are creating your own character and your own story. Make sure you design the gameplay and systems in such a way that they affect each other and cause changes to the world around you. Bethesda's old games are a sandbox of expression where you truly get to create your own character and your own experiences that are ingrained in your mind and give you that sense of nostalgia that you feel for all of their great old stuff. But their new games are more like a shallow theme park where you pay us a large fee just to get in and ride the ride for a little bit until you realize that none of it was really fun to begin with. Adding a building mechanic to Starfield like Fallout 4 in itself is shallow. You have to come up with new ideas. If we increase our strength stat, let us create new and bigger buildings that we can actually carry the material. If we increase our intelligence stat, let us create new and intricate trinkets that we can put in our houses. Create these systems that actually, as I said, give the player more agency and ability to create their own story, not just putting them on some straight, narrow path that you have already dictated they follow. Another thing too that I wanted to touch on is something that Bethesda realistically has never been super amazing at, and that's true, deep storytelling. Bethesda has had some great, comical, and interesting stories throughout their games, but they have never truly written amazing, immersive main stories and honestly kept the bar of quality in all their side quests super high. For those of you who don't know, it's a common practice at Bethesda where they don't actually hire any writers on staff. What they'll do is have anyone on the team, including programmers, artists, and managers, really just come up with random ideas that would seem cool for quests and things along those lines, and they essentially draw those ideas out of a hat and then have level and gameplay designers just make quests around that. And while that was cute and that does result in some pretty interesting quests, and I don't recommend Bethesda completely get rid of that, It's time that Bethesda finally get a dedicated writing team that can create more intricate and interesting characters and stories. That way the games don't have to fully rely on just the player creating their own story. Well, wait, what made Morrowind and Oblivion so great is all of the interactions with all of the different spells and things you could do in the world that ended up making you kind of create your own story that was totally separate from side missions and the main mission. But I think this style of gameplay, while it should be kept in Starfield, should be expanded upon with actually good writing and storytelling that will make all the moments where you aren't role-playing as your own character and story that much better. When we as gamers look back at Bethesda's old games, like Morrowind, Oblivion, and Fallout 3, a lot of our love for those games does stem from nostalgia. There are a lot of objectively bad parts to all of those games. And while that may be true and our nostalgia may blind us some, those games truly are better than what they're making today. And that comes down to the stellar game design that Bethesda was originally founded on and what originally made them so successful. We do not want another shallow theme park experience where we just walk through and there's only one way to conquer every mission and one way to do everything with very linear storytelling and not many ways to express ourselves. It's time we get back to the old ways that made you so great, Bethesda. And it's time you incorporate these changes into Starfield. And it is truly your greatest chance to do so. Starfield is your first foray into a new video game series in over a decade. For as long as we can remember, Bethesda has only been making the Elder Scrolls and Fallout series. And finally, with Starfield, they will be able to reinvigorate and reimagine a whole new world with what I will guess will be multiple planets, multiple races of aliens, and all new ways to play. And there has never been a better time than ever for Bethesda to redefine themselves and not only find the magic that made their old games so great, but also spark a new light into territory they have never been great at. That means creating better stories, having less bugs, and updating their engine to, quite honestly, get with the times of the early 2020s. Bethesda, this isn't about multiplayer, because quite honestly, that would probably be really cool in your style of games if implemented correctly. This isn't about combat, because Morrowind and all of your previous games never had good combat. This is about creating a game that can capture the imagination of your audience and allows them to tell and create their own stories through deep and engaging gameplay and world building. And you have never had a better time than to do that with Starfield. So, will Bethesda finally do it? Will Starfield be the game that brings them back to greatness? Ask him.
I'm just trying to ball, ain't no other way. AP in the ghost, ain't got time to waste. Say she wanna roll, I say on the left. Ride with a real one.